Hello and welcome. I am Christopher John Björknes. It is July 12th, 2022. Today I'm going to be discussing the Egyptian god Shezmu. Shezmu had kind of a dual personality. On the one hand, he preserved order in the universe for the sake of the righteous so that they could retain their lives. On the other hand, he would kill and butcher the other gods and feed them to his master god, Uranus. And he would also slaughter human beings. This slaughter was symbolically represented by severing the heads of human beings and treading them in a wine press to extract their blood and make a wine of it for his master god, Uranus, to drink. There are many theories that the gods of the Abrahamic faiths of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam are imitations of the Egyptian gods. One of those theories is that the pharaoh Akhenaten, who created monotheism, is in fact represented in the Bible as the figure Moses. Moses is a mythical figure. The Exodus is pure mythology. But there really was a pharaoh named Akhenaten. He destroyed all the idols in Egypt and replaced them with the worship of his god Aten, who was the sun. And he said that the sun is the only one god. The sun in Egypt was referred to as the one, and Ra was referred to as the one, and the God of Israel is referred to as the one. So many scholars and others have concluded that the monotheism of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam were in fact derived from this pharaoh Akhenaten and from his worship of the god Aten, who is the sun. You can see Akhenaten seated on the left below the sun. The rays of the sun are reaching down to the earth. On the right is his wife Nefertiti, who is also thought to be his sister, and his children are in their laps. And one of those children became the pharaoh Tutankhamun. Again, that god Aten became the god Yahweh in Judaism. Akhenaten, who was a real historical figure, became the mythical Moses. His wife and sister became Moses' sister Miriam, and their child became Tutankhamun, or Jesus. The Quran fits with this theory very well because the Quran posits that Jesus was the son of Miriam. Miriam is a variant of the name Mary, and in the Quran she's named Miriam. Jesus is named Asa. And Miriam's brother was Moses and Aaron, and the Quran is very explicitly states that Jesus' mother was Miriam, who was the sister of Aaron and Moses, and the daughter of Amram, whom the Quran calls Imran. This theory is set forth in the books by Ahmed Asman. Sigmund Freud had initially said that Akhenaten was the father of Jewish monotheism, and that he had a high priest, and that high priest became the character Moses in the Old Testament. Ahmad Asman goes further and states that Moses was in fact based upon this pharaoh Akhenaten, and that Akhenaten's son Tutankhamun became the archetype and the prototype and the typology of the New Testament for Jesus. And again, this fits very nicely with the Quran, which states that Jesus was the son of Moses' sister Miriam, and so that would fit with Nefertiti being the sister of Akhenaten and giving birth to Tutankhamun. In my book, Satanic Secrets of Jesus Christ, I give what I believe to be the more authentic, true history behind the evolution of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And they actually relate to more ancient gods than the god Aten, which was created by Akhenaten. And the original Egyptian gods incorporated the god Shezmu. Shesmu was a butcher for the god Unas, and Shesmu would slay the other gods and slay human beings and feed their flesh and souls and blood to his master god Unas, who would then absorb all of that energy and the magical powers of the souls of the gods and of human beings. And this process is described in Egyptian mythology as harvesting the grapes and then treading upon them in the winepress, which extracts the blood of the grapes and which stains the clothing of the god Shesmu, and of the winepress, stains it red like blood. The book Egyptian Mythology A to Z by Pat Remler describes this god Shesmu and states, best known as the god of the winepress, Shesmu has a complex personality. From the pyramid texts of Unas, we learn of his generous nature. He offers grape juice to Unas, with which to make wine in the next world, and he ferociously attacks the enemies of Unas. He casts wickedness on him that is wicked, and truth upon he who follows truth. I believe that Jesus Christ is based upon this God that has two personalities, Shesmu, in Egyptian mythology. Jesus saves the righteous and stomps out the wicked in his winepress in the exact same fashion that Shesmu had. And Jesus becomes the advocate of Israel and smites all of Israel's enemies when he returns as the Antichrist. So Jesus has this same complex dual personality. Initially, he comes as the salvation of the nations to save the righteous of the nations, but then he flips and becomes the advocate of Israel and the smiting stone, the stumbling stone, and the avenging sword of Israel that betrays the nations and ruins them. The article from Egyptian Mythology A to Z continues. Shesmu directs the pressing of grapes and oils of all kinds, including olive, pine, castor, almond, and oil from the seeds of the moringa tree, which grows in the desert and is quite rare. Oil from the moringa tree was used for making perfume, and Shesmu also became a god of perfume and sacred oils used in temple rituals and embalming. Remember that Mary anointed Jesus' feet with precious, expensive perfume and with her tears. And this represents the god Shesmu, who treads on the winepress with his feet, and that is what Jesus does. Jesus is the Messiah who was anointed for war, and he was anointed not to become the king of the Jews, but he was anointed as part of his embalming process because he was about to die. Egyptian mythology interchanges the idea of red wine and blood. That's also true of Christianity, where Jesus says that the Eucharist, the wine in the cup of God's wrath, is his blood. It was the color rather than the actual substance that was important to the Egyptians. When Shesmu is portrayed as a friend of the dead, he offers them wine to ease their journey to the netherworld. Jesus is the God of the dead. He shuns life on earth, and promises an afterlife in an eternal heavenly kingdom. All of this mirrors Egyptian mythology, where they believe that chaos and death are fought off through embalming and anointing with perfume that brings one into the afterlife. At the same time, he is linked with Apep, a terrible demon of the underworld, and is shown tossing the heads of enemies into his winepress to extract the blood as if it were grape juice. Jesus has this same dual nature. Apep is the serpent of chaos, and Jesus is also the serpent of chaos hanging on the cross, and the cross represents the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And Jesus is the serpent hanging on that tree, tempting mankind to consume the gnosis of his knowledge in the same sense that Adam and Eve consumed the gnosis that the serpent offered them from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. For the Egyptians, red wine was synonymous with blood. Same is true of the Christians. And blood is synonymous in Judaism with the soul. In the Cannibal hymn, Shesmu helps Unas gain power in the next world. Jesus helps Yahweh gain power by extracting the souls of the nations and giving those souls to Israel. Behold, Shesmu has cut them up for Unas. Unas is the equivalent of Yahweh. Shesmu is the equivalent of Jesus Christ. He has boiled pieces of them in his blazing cauldrons. Unas has eaten their words of power. He has eaten their spirits. This is what Jesus does as the scapegoat, the sacrificial goat of Israel. He calls upon all Christians to bear the same cross that he bears, and therefore become human sacrifices to Unas, just as he was a human sacrifice to Unas. And that enables Yahweh to extract all the souls of the nations, the soul of Yahida and the soul of Mashiach Yahida, and to transfer those to Israel and to the Messiah, son of David, King David, over Israel. The Book of the Dead tells us that one of Shesmu's title is Lord of the Blood. And in chapter 175, Osiris commands that Shesmu dismember the evil ones and place their heads in a winepress to be pressed like grapes and create wine. All of this same imagery is repeated both in the prophet Isaiah chapter 63 and in the book of Revelations in the New Testament, chapter 19, as I'll show you. Most often, Shesmu appears as a lion-headed or hawk-headed man with a uraeus on his head. His main cult center was in Fayum, but he was also worshipped at Edfu and Dendera, where he is shown on temple walls traveling in a solar boat wearing a uraeus and 2 stars on his head. Shesmu is linked with Re, the setting sun, for the red color. Apep, the evil god of the underworld and enemy of Re. Harasheph, who shares his title, Lord of the Blood. Horus, who, when he assumes the head of a falcon. Thoth, as the god of wisdom, and Nefertum as a god of perfume. So Jesus Christ is the God of wisdom in that he is the serpent hanging from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He is the God of chaos. Chaos is feminine. Chaos is wisdom. The female aspect of Jesus Christ is Sophia, which is Greek for wisdom. And Jesus himself, as the male aspect, is gnosis, which is knowledge as in the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Jesus is Apep, the serpentine god of chaos and the underworld, who battles with the serpent of light, which is Re or Yahweh. Eventually, the 2 serpents combine as one serpent, which is represented in the figure of the caduceus. And we see that in the crucifixion of Christ, where he has two figures on either side when he is crucified, and those two figures are then unified in the Christ figure as the caduceus. And so there are many, many correspondences between this butcher god Shezmu and the butcher god Jesus Christ. When he wore the Atef crown, the tall crown of Upper Egypt with ostrich plumes, he was affiliated with Cyrus, the god of the underworld. One of his titles is Lord of Blood, and in this role, Harishef is linked with Shezmu, a god with dual personality. And that dual personality manifests itself in Jesus Christ, who is both the Christ and the Antichrist. He returns as the Antichrist to tread the winepress and to stomp on the heads of all the nations for the benefit of Israel. He is killed in these battles of the nations and then transfers his soul over to Messiah, son of David, so that King David can rule in peace from Jerusalem. Jesus rules from Rome, from the nations, in the same sense that Joseph had ruled in Egypt behind the throne of the Pharaoh. So Jesus is referred to as the Messiah, son of Joseph. And he will wage all these wars and spill all of these oceans of blood and will die himself and then transfer his higher soul of chaos, the soul of Apep, the serpent of chaos who battles with the sun, the god Re. Every night and every day becomes a new day of creation. And ultimately, these two serpents intertwine with one another and become unified when the world and the universe are rectified in the world to come. In its article on wine, Egyptian Mythology A to Z states, in ancient Egypt, wine was reserved for the king's court and the wealthy. Because it was so costly, jars of wine were a worthy offering to the gods. The goddess Hathor was known for her love of wine, and on her festival days, everyone who could drank wine. The pyramid texts of Unas tell us that Shesmu, god of the winepress, gave Unas a vat of grape juice with which to make wine in the next world. Muchupu, in his book Wine and Wine Offering in the Religion of Ancient Egypt, wrote about wine and Shesmu. In the pyramid texts, the winepress god Shesmu assumes two different roles. In his original role, he is responsible for the bringing of wine. Shesmu comes to you, Osiris, bearing wine. Due to the special nature of the winepress, which presses out the juice of the grapes and thus exhibits a destructive power, Shesmu became associated with the image of a slaughterer. Thus, it is Shesmu who cuts them, i.e. those that are hostile to the king, up for the king. The same image appears in the coffin texts and in the Book of the Dead. A more explicit statement, a coffin text version of the above-quoted pyramid text, further indicates the identity of Shesmu as a slaughterer. It is Shesmu, red of timbers, i.e. the poles of the winepress, which were stained with red grape juice, who slaughters them for me. Coffin text 6:179. Thus, the red color of the juice of the grapes was likened to blood. The image of Shesmu as slaughterer is vividly portrayed in two illustrated papyri from the New Kingdom. There, human heads are shown placed in the winepress, while blood is dripping out of the sack. The Egyptians used to fill a sack with bunches of grapes and then twist it like wringing out a towel to extract the grape juice, which was first pressed by human feet. There, human heads are shown placed in the winepress, while blood is dripping out of the sack. The idea undoubtedly originated from the function of the winepress, as human heads are likened to grapes in the sack, while their blood was likened to grape juice. This image of the crushing of grapes in the process of winemaking may not have been unique in the ancient imagination, as a passage in the Old Testament attests. I have trodden the winepress alone. I trod them, i.e., people who sinned against God, in my anger, and I trampled them in my wrath. Their lifeblood is sprinkled on my garments, and I have stained all my raiment. Isaiah chapter 63, verse 3. Evidently, Muchopu did not realize that this figure was copied from Shesmu and represents the Messiah, son of Joseph, the Messiah anointed for war, Jesus Christ, who returns as the Antichrist and smites all of the nations and exterminates the nations so that Israel alone survives in the world to come. Furthermore, grape juice is once referred to in Ugaritic literature as the blood of the grapes. In my book, Satanic Secrets of Jesus Christ, I pointed all of this out, and I identified Jesus as Shesmu, both in the form of Christ and in the form of the Antichrist. Jesus treads the winepress. His blood is the Eucharist, and he feeds the blood and the souls of the nations to Yahweh and transfers their souls, their higher soul of chaos, of Yahida, to Israel. Jesus' blood fills the cup of God's wrath. The cup of God's wrath contains the poison which exterminates the nations for the benefit of his chosen people, the Israelites. The full reference in Isaiah to the Messiah, son of Joseph, treading the winepress, states, "Who is this coming from Edom?" Edom is associated with the nations. "From Bozrah, with his garments stained crimson red. Who is this robed in splendor, striding forward in the greatness of his strength? It is I, proclaiming victory, mighty to save." That is the Messiah, son of Joseph, who in the New Testament is represented as Jesus Christ. "Why are your garments red, like those of one treading the winepress? I have trodden the winepress alone. From the nations no one was with me. I trampled them in my anger and trod them down in my wrath. Their blood spattered my garments, and I stained all my clothing. It was for me the day of vengeance. The year for me to redeem had come. I looked, but there was no one to help. I was appalled that no one gave support. So my own arm achieved salvation for me, and my own wrath sustained me. I trampled the nations in my anger. In my wrath I made them drunk and poured their blood on the ground." Drunkenness, intoxication from wine, is equated to chaos, and the Egyptians viewed wine as a means of staving off chaos. The human lifespan was equated to the lifespan of creation, in which there is initially order, but order gives way and battles with chaos, which triumphs eventually over order. And the human body eventually ages, dies, and then decays. So the Egyptians utilized wine in their embalming rituals and in their worship of their gods as a method of staving off chaos. And wine is equated with chaos because intoxication produces a disorderly and chaotic mind in the intoxicated. The Greeks, in their god Dionysus, who is equated with Shesmu, took an opposite view, and they viewed the intoxication of drunkenness as freedom from order of the law and as a celebration of life, instead of representing death and decay, which is the way that the Egyptians viewed it. The book of Revelation reveals the fact that this figure, who was presented in Isaiah chapter 63, becomes Christ and effectively the Antichrist, who comes to slaughter all the nations for the benefit of Israel. Another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. Still another angel, who had charge of the fire, came from the altar and called in a loud voice to him who had the sharp sickle, "Take your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of grapes from the earth's vine, because its grapes are ripe." The angel swung his sickle on the earth, gathered its grapes, and threw them into the great winepress of God's wrath. They were trampled in the winepress outside the city, and blood flowed out of the press, rising as high as the horses' bridles, for a distance of 1,600 stadia. Coming out of his mouth is a sharp sword with which to strike down the nations. He will rule them with an iron scepter. He treads the winepress of the fury of the wrath of God Almighty. The fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is grapes. The tree itself is a grapevine. That fruit was initially unripe when Adam and Eve consumed it. It is Jesus' role in his 2,000-year reign in the age of Pisces, which is represented by those two serpents, those two leviathans, the two fish of Pisces. It is his role to create a vast empire and to slay all the other gods in the same way that Shesmu slayed all the other gods and fed the souls of those gods to his master god, Unas, Yahweh, so that that master god could assimilate all the energy of those souls and assimilate their magical powers. Jesus accomplishes the same tasks for Yahweh by slaying all the pagan gods and ultimately by returning as the Antichrist to completely exterminate all the heathen pagans of the nations who have worshipped Jesus. Jesus is a deceitful figure who presents himself as the salvation of the nations when he is in fact the salvation of Israel. The Book of the Dead in the Papyrus of Ani writes about Unas and Shesmu. Who then is this? It is Aneph, the god who bringeth his arm. As concerning the words, and again remember that arm in Isaiah 63. As concerning the words, that night of the reckoning of destruction, it is the night of the burning of the damned and the overthrow of the wicked at the sacred block and the slaughter of souls. Who then is this? It is Nemu, the headsman of Osiris. That Nemu is Shesmu. It is Apep, when he riseth up with one head bearing Meat. Meat is order. Here it is represented as right and truth. Upon it, or as others say, it is Horus, when he riseth up with two heads, whereof the one beareth Meat, and the other wickedness. This is again the two-headed serpent, which is Jesus Christ and his opposition, the Messiah, son of David. The two of them form the body and soul of the ultimate Messiah, son of David, after Jesus Christ dies and renders his soul unto Messiah, son of David. So this is all derived from the Egyptian belief that there are two serpents, the serpent of light and the serpent of darkness. And Jesus is the serpent of darkness hanging on the cross, which is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He bestoweth wickedness on him that worketh wickedness, and Meat, which is order, on him that followeth after righteousness and truth, or as others say, it is the great Horus who dwelleth in Shechem, or as others say, it is Toth, Or, as others say, it is Nefer Tamu or Sept, who doth thwart the course of the foes of Neber-Chur. So again, Jesus has this same dual nature. He mass murders those deemed wicked, which are the idolaters, the nations, and he provides order to the righteous. The righteous are the Israelites. And he will establish order by destroying the wicked nations. And he will die in that process. And then the heir to King David's throne will then be able to live in peace. You can see in the illustration Shesmu bearing 2 knives, having a lion's head or a falcon's head. And he is the butcher for the god Unas. Part of the hieroglyphics for Shesmu's name is the winepress itself. And you can see that. Here he's called Nemu, but it's actually Shesmu. And this is from the papyrus of Ani in the Book of the Dead. As concerning night, that of the reckoning of the destroying goddess, the night it is of the burning up of the enemies, and of causing the destruction of the wicked at his block, and of the slaughter of souls. Who then is it? Nemu, which is Shesmu. It is the slaughterer of Osiris, otherwise said Apep, who is the serpent of chaos, who battles with Ra at night when Ra sails through the cosmos on his boat, and his ally Horus helps him battle Apep, the serpent of chaos, so that a new day of creation can arise at the dawn. When he riseth up with one head, having upon it Me'at, which is order, they are imposing order upon chaos, and that order is what preserves life. Otherwise said, Horus it is when he riseth up with 2 heads, one having Me'at, and the other having wickedness. He giveth wickedness to the worker thereof, and Me'at order to him that followeth after it. Otherwise said, Horus is it the great president of Shechem, otherwise said Toth it is, otherwise said Nefertamu it is, or Septu, thwarting the business of the enemies of Neber-Chur. Deliver thou from those watchers who bring slaughtering knives, and are provided with fingers cruel, and slay those who are in the following of Osiris. So Jesus has this dual nature of saving the righteous and slaughtering the wicked. The wicked are the nations, and the righteous are Israel. In his introduction to Ernest Alfred Wallace Budge's translation of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, John Romer wrote, "The recital of this chapter enabled the deceased to avoid the terrible block of slaughter of the god Osiris, a figure of which is given in the vignette. From the book Am Tust and the Book of Gates, as well as from the Book of the Dead, we learn that to certain gods was assigned the duty of destroying the dead and consuming their bodies. Some were cast into a lake of liquid fire or burning water, and others were first cut into pieces and then burnt. Each of the gods who cut the dead in pieces was provided with a block, and they performed their terrible work under the direction of the headsman of Osiris, whose name was Shesmu." And there you can see the hieroglyphic for Shesmu includes a picture of the winepress. As the name is written in the pyramid texts, the slaughter of the wicked and the cutting up of their bodies were performed nightly, soon after Osiris had completed the judging of those who had entered the hall of Me'eti. This again all relates to Jesus' role as the treader of the winepress who slaughters the nations for the benefit of Israel. Plutarch wrote about the Egyptians' practices in his book on Isis and Osiris, found in the Moralia, Volume 5, published by Harvard University Press, where Plutarch stated, "The beginning of their drinking dates from the reign of Psammetichus. Before that, they did not drink wine nor use it in libation as something dear to the gods, thinking it to be the blood of those who had once battled against the gods, and from whom, when they had fallen and had become commingled with the earth, they believed vines to have sprung. So the Egyptians believed that grapevines were derived from the blood of those who had fallen when they were battling against the gods. So wine has a very pejorative, negative image in Egyptian mythology, as it does in Judaism. But among the Greeks, the god Shezmu flips and becomes the god Dionysus, who celebrates with wine and is also the god of the vine. This is the reason why drunkenness drives men out of their senses and crazes them, inasmuch as they are then filled with the blood of their forebears. These tales Eudoxus says in the second book of his world travels are thus related by the priests. Those priests would be Egyptian priests. So we see that the Egyptians had the polar opposite view of wine and intoxication that the Romans did. And the Egyptians believed that they could stave off chaos and preserve the order of life through the use of wine. The Romans, on the other hand, celebrated wine as a form of becoming chaotic and becoming intoxicated and celebrating the joy of life. So the Romans viewed disorder as a celebration of order. The Egyptians viewed intoxication and the chaos that wine induces as the triumph of the serpent Apep and the triumph of chaos, which brings death and decay and the breaking down of the order of life into death, which the Egyptians thought they could stave off through embalming and through the rituals of the Book of the Dead, which would enable a soul to survive into the afterlife and have a body in the afterlife through maintaining the order of life and not succumbing to the chaos of death. The Cannibal hymn from the pyramid texts provides many of the correspondences between Judaism, Christianity, and the Egyptian mythology which Judaism and Christianity copy. The sky pours water, the stars darken, the bows rush about, and the bones of the earth gods tremble. They are still, the Pleiades, when they see Venus, which is Eunice, appearing animated, as a god who lives on his fathers and feeds on his mothers. So the god Eunice kills all the other gods in the same sense that Yahweh is a jealous God, and Jesus was brought forth to subvert the nations and lead them to destroy their own pagan gods. So in the same way that Judaism feeds off the pagan gods, Eunice feeds off his mothers and fathers and the other gods of the Egyptians. Eunice is the Lord of wisdom, whose mother knows not his name. This is similar to the Gnostic mythology of Barbelo creating the god Yaldabaoth, and Yaldabaoth being unaware of his mother Sophia or Barbelo, who is wisdom, who created him. The glory of Venus, which is Eunice, is in the sky. His power is in the horizon. Like Atum, his father who begat him, when he begat Unas, he, Venus, was mightier than he. This is reflected in the Greek myths. The Greeks also copied these same myths from the Egyptians and learned them from Egyptian priests. And we see in Greek mythology that the god Kronos castrates his father Uranus so that he can beget no more children. And then Zeus defeats his father Kronos. So this same process of the son slaying his father is copied in the Greek myths and in the mythology of Oedipus, which Sigmund Freud found so intriguing. The kas of Venus are about him. His attributes are under his feet. His gods are upon him. His urei are on his brow. The guiding serpent of Venus is on his forehead, and his soul beholds the serpent of flame. Also bear in mind that the pharaohs bore a serpent on their forehead. That became the tefillin in Judaism, where they have a little black box on their foreheads. All of that is copied from the pharaohs. The powers of Venus protect him. Venus is the bull of the sky, who conquers according to his desire, who lives on the being of every god. Yahweh lives on the being of every god and on the souls of the nations. He feasts on those other gods by destroying the pagan gods, by tricking the nations into abandoning their own gods and worshiping Jesus, who is Shezmu, who then captures their souls when they worship him and feeds those souls to Yahweh, who then transfers them to Israel. The nations are represented by Esau in the Old Testament, and the Israelites are represented by Jacob. Esau surrenders his birthrights and blessings to Jacob, who tricks Esau out of that birthright and blessings. And ultimately, the birthright and blessings are the souls of the peoples of the nations. And the Israelites have tricked the nations into surrendering their souls to Shezmu, who then feeds them to Yahweh, who then assigns them to the Israelites. And ultimately, Shezmu's soul, the soul of Messiah, son of Joseph, is given up and then enters the body of Messiah, son of David, and becomes the unified Messiah. The two serpents wrapped about each other in the caduceus, which signifies the ultimate Messiah, the unification of the serpent of darkness and serpent of light, becoming one androgynous being, in the same sense that Adam was initially androgynous, Adam and Eve. The two serpents are also androgynous and have to be restored to one form. And the God of Israel is also androgynous. Its male aspect is Yahweh, and its female aspect is Shekinah, who is the Canaanite goddess Asherah, who is the goddess of chaos and wisdom. Who eats their entrails, who comes when their belly is filled with magic. He wants to eat them and eat their guts when their belly is filled with magic, so that Unas can absorb all the magic of the spirit and the soul of the other gods. And the same thing is done with the nations. Their spirit and soul is consumed by Christ when he returns as the Antichrist and slays all of them for Yahweh, who then absorbs all of their soul and magic. From the island of fire. Unas is equipped. His spirits are united. Unas appears as the Great One, Lord of divine helpers. Again, Yahweh is referred to as the Great One in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 and 1, the Shema that Israelites utter as their prayer, where they call Yahweh the Holy One. And the sun and Ra were also referred to as the One in Egyptian mythology. That One becomes the monad of Platonic philosophy and the philosophy of the Greek philosopher Parmenides, which the Alexandrian Jews incorporated into Judaism as the Holy One. He sits with his back to Geb. It is Venus who judges with him whose name is hidden in this day of slaying the oldest one. That is Jesus in the final judgment, returning as the Antichrist to slay all the nations and exterminate them from the earth, so that Israel can live in a messianic era of peace in the world to come. Venus is the Lord of food offering, who knots the cord, who himself prepares his meals. It is Venus who eats men and lives on gods, Lord of porters who dispatches messages. It is grasper of horns, who lassoes them for Venus. It is the serpent, he whose head is raised, who watches them for him and who drives them to him. It is he who is upon the willows, who binds them for him. It is the wanderer who slaughters the lords, who strangles them for Venus. This is all Shesmu. This is Jesus Christ, who has deceived the nations and tricked them into becoming Christians and giving up their souls to Yahweh, who consumes them. He cuts out their intestines for him. He is the messenger whom he sends to punish. It is he of the winepress. Remember, Jesus is the God of the winepress, who cuts them up for Venus, cooking for him a portion of them in his evening cooking pots. It is Venus who eats their magic and swallows their spirits. Their great ones are for his morning portion. Their mid-sized ones are for his evening portions. Their little ones are for his night portion. Their old men and old women are for his incense burning. It is the great ones who are in the north of the sky who place for him the fire to the kettles containing them with the thighs of their oldest ones. Those who are in the sky serve Venus. The cooking pots are wiped out for him with the legs of their women. He has gone around the two complete skies. He has encircled the two regions. Venus is the great mighty one who has power over the mighty ones. Venus is the figure of a god who endows with divinity the great figures of the gods. It's important to remember in all this that this is the very oldest form of Egyptian worship of the gods, and by thousands of years predates Akhenaten and his conception of Aten as the Holy One, as the God of the Sun, who has destroyed all the idols and false gods. I believe the god Aten is the ultimate fulfillment of the god Venus when the other gods have been slaughtered. Him whom he finds in his way, him he devours for himself quite raw. The protection of Venus is before all the noble ones who are in the horizon. Venus is a god, older than the oldest. Thousands serve him, hundreds offer to him. Human sacrifices are given to Venus. A warrant of appointment as great mighty one is given to him by Orion, father of the gods. Venus has reappeared in the sky. He is crowned as Lord of the horizon. He has smashed the vertebrae and the spinal marrows. He has taken the hearts of the gods. He has eaten the red crown. He has swallowed the green one. Venus feeds on the lungs of the wise ones. He is satisfied by living on hearts and their magic. Venus rejoices that he devours those which are in the red crown. Venus flourishes. Their magic is in his belly. The dignities of Venus are not taken from him. He has swallowed the intelligence of every god. The lifetime of Venus is eternity. His limit is everlastingness. In this, his dignity of if he wishes, he does. If he wishes not, he does not. Recall that Yahweh is the arrogant God who wants to control everything in the universe. Who is within the boundary of the horizon forever and ever? Lo, their soul is in the belly of Venus. Their spirits are with Venus. Again, Venus is the god Unas, the master god of Shesmu, who is his butcher. His surplus of food is more than that of the gods, being cooked for Venus with their bones. It is Shesmu who cooks them in his cooking pots for Unas. Lo, their soul is with Venus. Their shadows are with their companions. Venus is with this which appears, which hides. The doers of evil deeds have not power over the hacking up of the earth. The favorite place of Venus is with those who live in this earth forever and ever. That will be the Israelites in the world to come. I'm going to show you the commentary and notes incorporated into this book very briefly. If you would like, you can pause the video and read them. So Jesus is the god of the winepress. Jesus is the Egyptian God Shezmu. Jesus is the grapevine, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. His fruit is knowledge. That knowledge is unripe for the first 6 days of creation, the 6,000 years from Adam until Jesus returns, when the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil is ripe. When that fruit of knowledge is ripe, as it is today, there will be weapons of war which will be able to exterminate all of the nations. Cain and his descendant Tubal-Cain inherited the knowledge of the tree of good and evil, but it was still unripe. And they utilized it to create arms and armor made from metals. Jesus returned as the serpent from the Garden of Eden, hung on the cross as the serpent hung in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is a grapevine. Jesus offers up the unripe fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the form of his blood, which is wine, which Christians consume in the cup of God's wrath. That cup of God's wrath bears the serpent Apep, who is chaos. It promotes intoxication, which befuddles the minds of the nations and leads them to worship the Christ. The Christ returns as the Antichrist to tread the winepress and stain his clothing with the blood of all the nations until their blood flows deep enough to rise up to the level of a horse's bridle. That knowledge has become ripe and has provided biological weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons of mass destruction, and chemical weapons of mass destruction, which will enable the nations to devour themselves in the same sense that they devoured their own pagan gods and instead worshipped Shesmu in the form of Jesus Christ. In that way, they lost all of their supernatural protection and came to worship the serpent Satan, who is Jesus Christ and who will ultimately exterminate all of them. If you would like to learn more about Shesmu, the Egyptian god of the winepress, and how he correlates to Jesus as both the Christ and the Antichrist, you can find my book, Satanic Secrets of Jesus Christ, Volume 2, Jesus is Satan, on my website at CJBBooks.com. Shesmu is the Egyptian god who slays all the other gods and wicked human beings and feeds their blood and their souls and their magic powers to his master god, Unas. He corresponds in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam to Yahweh and Asa, or Jesus, who is both the Christ and the Antichrist. He has a dual personality in the same sense that Jesus has a dual personality, being both the Christ and the Antichrist. All of this mythology was derived by copying the Egyptian gods, Unas and Shesmu. We are in grave peril in the present era as religious persons call for the end times and want to fulfill their eschatological prophecies. I believe it is very important for us to understand the roots of all of these horrific mythologies and what those beliefs portend for humanity if we do not expose their ultimate source and their ultimate quest, which is to destroy the nations and kill off humanity with the ripened fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is given to humanity by Satan in these mythologies. We are in grave peril that there are people who believe in this 6,000-year-old mythology that Shesmu will come and trample the winepress and stomp on the heads of all wicked human beings, which represents all the nations in these Abrahamic faiths, and will kill us all off. And I hope you appreciate the gravity of the situation, where these beliefs came from, and where we are headed if we do not defend ourselves from these horrific ancient mythologies, which were not handed down to us by the gods, but instead by the Egyptians who invented these mythologies. Please visit my website, cjbbooks.com. Please educate yourself. It is the best way that we can defend ourselves from those who believe in these mythologies. Please donate. There is a donate link in the description below, which will help me to keep providing these truths to the general public so that hopefully someday we can expose the source of all of these mythologies and where they are misleading us towards the direction of suicidal self-extermination. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time.